The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as Kate stood by the window of her private study. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the official letter that had arrived just hours before. The words seemed to blur together on the cream-colored paper, but their meaning was crystal clear. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was about to change forever. William found her there 20 minutes later, still in the same position, still staring at the document that would reshape their lives. He approached slowly, recognizing the tension in her shoulders and the way she held herself when facing something difficult. "Kate?" His voice was gentle, concerned. "What is it?" Cross-gitted. She turned to face him, and he saw immediately that she had been crying. Her usually bright eyes were red-rimmed, and there was a vulnerability in her expression that he rarely witnessed. Kate was strong, always had been, but today something had broken through her careful composure. "It's the assignment," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. "They want me to go to Australia." For 2 years, William felt his world tilt. He had known this possibility existed, had even discussed it in abstract terms with his advisors, but seeing it become reality was entirely different. Kate's role as a cultural ambassador had always been important, but this assignment would take her halfway around the world. 2 years? He repeated, as if saying it aloud might change the facts. "The letter says, it's an honor, a recognition of my work with international relations. They need someone to oversee the new cultural exchange program, to build stronger ties between Britain and Australia." Kate's voice grew steadier as she spoke, falling back into the professional tone she used during official duties. But William could see the pain behind her words. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. They were cold, despite the warmth of the morning. "We'll figure this out," he said, though even as he spoke, he wondered how they possibly could. Kate pulled her hands free and walked back to the window. "Will we? Really? Because I've been standing here for the past hour trying to see a way through this, and I can't find one." The palace had rules, protocols that governed every aspect of their lives. William's duties kept him anchored to Britain, to the endless round of ceremonies, meetings, and obligations that defined his existence. Kate's work, while important, had always been secondary to supporting his role. But this assignment was different. It was hers alone, a chance to make her mark on something that mattered. "You could turn it down," William suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. They both knew what that would mean. Kate had already sacrificed so much to fit into the royal framework. Declining this opportunity would effectively end her independent career aspirations. And do what instead? Cut another ribbon? Attend another charity tea? The bitterness in Kate's voice surprised them both. She had never spoken this way about her royal duties before, had always maintained the careful balance between personal desires and public service. William felt a flush of anger, though he wasn't sure if it was directed at Kate, at the situation, or at the system that had put them in this impossible position. "Those duties matter, Kate. People depend on them, depend on us. I know they do," she said quietly. "And I've never complained, have I? I've done everything asked of me. Smiled for every camera. Shaken every hand. But this is my chance to do something that's mine. Something that could actually make a difference." But the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. William understood her frustration, had felt similar stirrings himself over the years. But understanding and accepting were different things entirely. "What about us?" he asked finally. "What about our marriage?" Kate turned back to him, and he saw fresh tears in her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted. "I honestly don't know." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of difficult conversations. They spoke with advisors, with family members, with anyone who might offer guidance or alternatives. But every discussion led back to the same impossible choice: Kate's career or their life together. Camilla arrived at the palace just after lunch, summoned by William, who hoped his stepmother might offer some perspective. She had, after all, navigated her own complicated path through royal life. But when William explained the situation, Camilla's reaction was not what he had expected. "Well, she'll simply have to decline." Camilla said with the certainty of someone who saw the world in clear, uncomplicated terms. Family comes first. Surely she understands that. Kate, who had been sitting quietly during the explanation, looked up sharply. It's not that simple, isn't it? Camilla's tone was polite but firm. You took vows, made commitments. This assignment, however prestigious, is still just a job. Just a job? Kate's voice rose slightly, then she caught herself, remembering where she was and who she was speaking to. I'm sorry, but this represents years of work, of building relationships and expertise. It's not something that can be easily replaced. Camilla smiled, but there was no warmth in it. My dear, we all have to make sacrifices. I gave up my privacy, my freedom to speak my mind, my ability to live a normal life. These are the costs of being part of this family. The conversation continued for another hour, growing more tense with each exchange. Camilla maintained her position with unwavering certainty, while Kate grew increasingly frustrated with what she saw as a dismissal of her professional achievements. William found himself caught between two women he cared about, unable to fully support either position without betraying the other. Evening came with no resolution in sight. Kate had retreated to their private quarters, while William remained in his study, staring at reports he couldn't concentrate on. The palace felt different somehow, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. When William finally went upstairs, he found Kate packing. Not everything, just a small suitcase, with enough clothes for a few days. Where are you going? He asked, though part of him already knew. To my sister's house. I need some time to think. Some space to figure out what I really want. She folded a sweater carefully, not meeting his eyes. This decision affects my entire future, William. I can't make it under pressure, with everyone watching and offering opinions. And us? What about us while you're thinking? Kate finally looked at him, and he saw exhaustion in her face along with the sadness. I don't know, she said again, the words that had become a refrain throughout this terrible day. I love you. I do. But I can't keep pretending that love is enough to solve every problem we face. William wanted to argue, to find the words that would make everything right again. But as he watched Kate close her suitcase, he realized that perhaps she was right. Perhaps some problems were too big for love alone to fix. The next morning, Kate's departure was quiet, almost secretive. She left early, before the palace fully awakened, taking only her small suitcase and a letter for William that she left on his desk. The letter was brief, explaining that she needed time to consider not just this opportunity but their entire future together. William found himself alone in their quarters, surrounded by reminders of their shared life, but feeling Kate's absence in every corner. He picked up the small framed photo from their wedding day, studying Kate's radiant smile and wondering if he would ever see that particular expression of joy again. The palace staff moved around him with careful efficiency, sensing the tension that had settled over the household like a heavy blanket. Everyone knew something significant had happened, but no one spoke of it directly. Such was the way of royal life, where personal dramas were often conducted in whispers and meaningful glances. By noon, William had made his own decision. He would give Kate the space she needed, but he wouldn't remain passive. If their marriage was worth fighting for, then he needed to understand exactly what they were fighting against. He began making phone calls, reaching out to contacts who might help him understand the full scope of Kate's dilemma and whether any alternatives existed. Meanwhile, at her sister's house, Kate sat in the garden, trying to imagine her life taking either path. Stay, and accept that her individual ambitions would always be secondary to royal obligations. Go, and risk losing the man she loved and the life they had built together. Both choices felt like betrayals of some essential part of herself. The phone calls from the palace began by afternoon. First William's private secretary, then various advisors, and finally Camilla herself. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: expressions of concern, gentle pressure to return, and subtle reminders of duty and obligation. Kate listened politely but gave no commitments. She had asked for time to think, and she intended to use it fully. The decision she was facing would echo through the rest of her life, affecting not just her own future but William's as well. Such choices deserved more than hasty reactions driven by emotion or pressure from others. As the first day of her absence ended, both Kate and William found themselves lying awake in their respective beds, staring at ceilings and trying to imagine a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. The easy certainties of their early marriage had been replaced by complex questions about love, duty, sacrifice, and personal fulfillment. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new pressures, and perhaps new insights. But tonight, they were simply two people who loved each other, separated by distance and difficult choices, wondering if love really could conquer all, or if some problems were too fundamental to overcome. The palace settled into an uneasy quiet, while in a modest house across the city, Kate made herself tea and prepared for what might be the most important decision of her life. Whatever she chose, nothing would ever be quite the same again. 3 days had passed since Kate left the palace, and the silence between her and William felt like a growing chasm. Each morning brought new complications as the royal household struggled to maintain normal operations while dealing with Kate's unexpected absence. The media had begun to notice. Palace reporters, always alert to changes in routine, started asking questions about Kate's whereabouts. The official response was that she was taking some private time for personal matters. But such explanations only fueled more speculation. William found himself caught in an increasingly difficult position. His public duties continued without pause, requiring him to appear composed and focused while privately grappling with the possibility that his marriage might be ending. Each appearance became an exercise in careful performance, maintaining the royal facade while his personal world crumbled. On Thursday morning, Kate's sister Pippa found her sitting in the same garden chair where she had spent most of the previous 3 days, staring thoughtfully at the assignment letter that had started everything. "You can't keep torturing yourself like this," Pippa said gently, settling into the chair beside her. "Either take the job or don't, but make a decision." "It's not that simple," Kate replied, the words that had become her constant refrain. "Every choice feels like giving up something essential." Pippa studied her sister's face, seeing the exhaustion and uncertainty that had replaced Kate's usual confidence. "Tell me about the assignment. Really tell me. Not the official description but what it means to you." Kate was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "It's everything I trained for. Everything I've worked toward since university. The Australian government specifically requested me because of the work I've done with cultural diplomacy. It would be my program, my vision, my responsibility. And William is..." Kate struggled to find the right words. "William is the love of my life. He's my anchor, my best friend, my partner in everything that matters. But he's also part of a system that will never really see me as anything more than a supporting player." The harsh truth hung between them. Kate had always known that marrying into the royal family would require sacrifices, but she had underestimated how completely her individual identity would be subsumed into her role as William's wife. "Have you talked to him since you left?" Kate shook her head. "What would I say? That I love him, but I'm not sure love is enough? That I want the assignment, but I don't want to lose my marriage?" There's no conversation that makes this easier. Meanwhile, at the palace, William was discovering just how isolated his position had become. His closest advisors, while sympathetic to his personal situation, were primarily concerned with the potential public relations disaster if Kate's absence became permanent. Camilla, despite her good intentions, seemed unable to understand why Kate couldn't simply accept her role as it was defined by tradition. The breaking point came on Friday afternoon. William had just returned from a particularly difficult meeting with senior palace officials who had made their position clear. Kate needed to return immediately, or face the consequences of abandoning her royal duties. The language had been diplomatic, but the threat was unmistakable. William found himself alone in the library, surrounded by centuries of royal history and tradition that suddenly felt more like a prison than a legacy. He picked up his phone 3 times before finally calling Kate. She answered on the second ring, her voice carefully neutral. "Hello? William, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Really talk. Not the careful conversations we've been having for months. Can I come see you?" There was a pause, and William held his breath, wondering if she would refuse. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I think we do need to talk." An hour later, William arrived at Pippa's house without his usual security detail, having convinced them that a low-key approach would draw less attention. Kate met him at the door, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, as if trying to recognize the people they had been before everything became so complicated. They walked to the garden where Kate had spent so much time thinking. The afternoon light was soft, casting everything in a gentle glow that made the moment feel almost dreamlike. "I've been thinking too," William said as they settled into the garden chairs. "About what you said, about sacrifices and choices, and what we both want from our lives." Kate waited, sensing that he needed to work through his thoughts without interruption. "I love you," he continued. "That's not in question, has never been in question. But I've been wondering if love means holding on tight, or sometimes knowing when to let go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Kate felt her heart skip, unsure whether he was offering freedom or preparing to end things himself. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying that maybe the palace officials are wrong. Maybe there's another way to look at this." William leaned forward, his voice gaining intensity. "What if instead of seeing your assignment as abandoning duty, we positioned it as extending our influence? What if we made it clear that you're not running away from royal responsibilities but taking them global?" Kate stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "The palace would never approve that interpretation." "The palace doesn't have to approve it," William said firmly. "I do. And I'm telling you that I want you to take the assignment. William, be serious. 2 years apart, with me on the other side of the world? That's not sustainable for any marriage. Let alone one that's constantly under public scrutiny. Then we'll figure out how to make it work. I can visit. You can come back periodically. Technology exists for a reason. It won't be easy, but maybe easy isn't what matters most." Kate felt tears starting, the first she had cried since leaving the palace 3 days earlier. But these weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of love for a man who was willing to risk everything to support her dreams. "You would really do that? Really support me taking this assignment, even though it means time apart? Even though the palace disapproves? Even though it complicates everything?" "Kate, I fell in love with your strength, your intelligence, your passion for making a difference. If I try to limit those qualities now just to make my life easier, then I'm not really loving you at all. I'm loving some diminished version of who you could be." They talked for hours as the afternoon faded into evening. They discussed practical considerations, emotional challenges, and the very real possibility that their marriage might not survive the strain. But they also talked about possibilities, about the chance to redefine what a royal marriage could look like in the modern world. As night fell, they made their decision. Kate would accept the Australian assignment, but they would face it together. As partners, rather than as individuals, making separate choices. It would require compromise from both of them, sacrifice from both of them. But it would also allow them both to remain true to themselves. The next morning, Kate returned to the palace with William. The staff welcomed her back with careful smiles and studied normalcy. But she could feel the undercurrent of tension. News of her decision to accept the assignment would not be well received in certain quarters. The confrontation with Camilla came that afternoon, just as Kate had expected. She found William's stepmother in the blue drawing room, having tea, and apparently waiting for her. "Kate, dear, I'm so glad you've come to your senses," Camilla said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This whole situation has been quite concerning for everyone." "I have come to a decision," Kate replied carefully. "But perhaps not the one you're expecting." Camilla's smile faltered as Kate explained her choice to accept the Australian assignment. The older woman listened in growing disbelief, her composure cracking with each word. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Camilla said finally, her voice sharp. "You cannot simply abandon your duties here because some foreign posting appeals to you." "I'm not abandoning anything," Kate replied firmly. "I'm expanding my role, taking on new responsibilities that will benefit both Britain and Australia." "Don't dress it up in diplomatic language," Camilla snapped. You're choosing your career over your family, over your marriage, over everything that should matter to a woman in your position. Kate felt her own temper rising but forced herself to remain calm. My position, as I understand it, is to serve my country and support my husband. This assignment allows me to do both. By living on the other side of the world? By leaving William to manage alone while you pursue your personal ambitions. Camilla's voice grew colder with each word. I'm disappointed in you, Kate. I thought you understood what it meant to be part of this family. The accusation stung because it touched on Kate's deepest fears about her choice. But she had spent 3 days examining those fears and had reached a different conclusion than Camilla. I understand perfectly what it means to be part of this family, Kate said quietly. It means service, sacrifice, and putting the greater good above personal comfort. What we disagree on is whether supporting my husband means limiting myself or becoming the best version of myself that I can be. Camilla stood abruptly, her face set in disapproving lines. I see that your mind is made up. I hope you don't live to regret this decision. Though I suspect you will. With that, she left the room, her departure punctuated by the sharp click of her heels on the polished floor. Kate remained seated, shaken by the encounter but not swayed from her decision. William found her there 20 minutes later, still processing the confrontation with Camilla. He could see immediately that something had happened, could read the tension in Kate's posture and the tightness around her eyes. She didn't take it well, Kate said simply when he asked. I didn't expect her to, William replied, settling beside her on the sofa. Camilla's had to make her own compromises to fit into this family. I think seeing you choose differently feels like a rejection of the sacrifices she made. Do you think she's right? Do you think I'm being selfish? William took her hands, the same gesture he had made just days earlier when this all began. But now his grip was steadier, more certain. I think you're being brave, he said. I think you're choosing to believe that love can be stronger than fear, that our marriage can withstand challenges, that we can create something new rather than just accepting something old. Kate squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his certainty. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with criticism and challenges they couldn't even anticipate yet. But for the first time in days, she felt hope rather than despair. The announcement of Kate's assignment was made the following week, carefully worded to emphasize the honor of the appointment and the benefit to British interests. The media reaction was mixed, with some praising Kate's professional achievements, while others questioned the wisdom of such a long separation. Public opinion was similarly divided. Many people admired Kate's independence and ambition, seeing her choice as a positive evolution of the royal role. Others worried about the precedent it set and the potential impact on her marriage. Through it all, Kate and William presented a united front, appearing together at official functions and making it clear that they supported each other's decisions. But privately, they were both aware that their real test would come when Kate actually left for Australia. The weeks leading up to her departure were bittersweet, filled with last-minute preparations and stolen moments together. They made plans for regular communication, scheduled visits, and ways to share important events despite the distance. But they also acknowledged that no amount of planning could fully prepare them for the reality of separation. As Kate's departure date approached, both she and William found themselves questioning their decision at different moments. The doubts were natural, even expected, but they didn't change their fundamental belief that this was the right path forward. The night before Kate was to leave, they sat together in their private sitting room, surrounded by packed suitcases and the weight of impending change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, and new tests of their commitment to each other. But tonight, they were simply Kate and William, two people who loved each other enough to risk everything on the belief that their love could survive anything. It was a leap of faith that would define not just their marriage but their individual futures as well. The morning of Kate's departure dawned gray and misty, as if the London sky was reflecting the somber mood that had settled over the palace. Kate had barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between excitement about her new assignment and dread about leaving William behind. She found William already awake, standing by the window of their bedroom, still in his pajamas, but clearly having been up for some time. His shoulders were tense, and she could see the careful control he was exercising to maintain his composure. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside him. "100 of them," he admitted without looking at her. "But not about the decision itself. Just about how hard this is going to be." Kate slipped her hand into his, and they stood together in silence, watching the palace grounds slowly come to life in the early morning light. Gardeners moved quietly among the flower beds, security personnel walked their routes, and somewhere in the distance, a delivery truck rumbled through the gates. Life at the palace continued its measured pace, seemingly unaware that everything was about to change. "We should get ready," Kate said finally, though neither of them moved. 5 more minutes, William replied, squeezing her hand. "Just give me 5 more minutes of this being normal." But normal was already gone. Had been gone since the moment Kate received that assignment letter. Today was simply the day they would acknowledge that fact publicly. The breakfast that followed was stilted, both of them making efforts at conversation that felt forced and unnatural. Kate picked at her food, her stomach too knotted with nerves to handle much. William read through official papers, but she could see that he wasn't really processing the words. At 9 o'clock, Kate's official car arrived to take her to the airport. Her luggage had been loaded earlier, leaving only her carry-on bag and the horrible moment of actually saying goodbye. The palace staff had gathered in the main hall, a gesture of respect that Kate found both touching and overwhelming. These were people who had become part of her daily life, who had watched her grow into her royal role, and who would now have to adjust to her absence. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper who had been Kate's unofficial guide during her early days at the palace, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "We'll miss you terribly," she said, embracing Kate warmly. Similar sentiments were echoed by other staff members, each goodbye adding to the emotional weight of the moment. Kate found herself crying despite her efforts to remain composed, touched by the genuine affection these people had shown her. William walked with her to the car, their hands clasped tightly together. The media had been kept at a distance, but Kate could see photographers with long lenses positioned beyond the palace gates, ready to capture this moment for the world to see. "This isn't goodbye," William said as they reached the car. "This is just, see you later." "See you later," Kate repeated, trying to make the words sound natural and confident. They kissed. A brief, careful kiss appropriate for public viewing but charged with all the emotion they couldn't express in front of the cameras. Then Kate stepped into the car, and William closed the door behind her. As the car pulled away from the palace, Kate looked back to see William standing in the doorway, his hand raised in a wave that managed to be both regal and heartbreakingly personal. She pressed her own hand against the window, a gesture that would be captured by those distant photographers and analyzed in newspapers around the world. The drive to Heathrow passed in a blur. Kate's private secretary, who would be traveling with her to Australia, made quiet conversation about the flight schedule and the welcoming committee that would meet them in Sydney. But Kate found it hard to focus on practical details when her mind was still back at the palace, replaying those final moments with William. At the airport, there was another round of official goodbyes. The Australian High Commissioner had come to see her off, along with several British officials who would be involved in the cultural exchange program. The ceremony was brief but formal, emphasizing the importance of Kate's mission and the honor of the assignment. But as Kate boarded the plane, all the official language and diplomatic protocol faded into background noise. She was no longer the Duchess representing British interests abroad. She was simply a woman leaving her husband behind for 2 years, hoping that their marriage would survive the distance. The first-class cabin was comfortable and private, but Kate found no peace in the luxury. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she felt each mile between herself and William as a physical ache. The rational part of her mind knew this was the right decision, but her heart was less convinced. Takeoff was smooth, the plane rising steadily through the gray London clouds toward clearer skies above. Kate watched the city grow smaller below her, picking out familiar landmarks until they disappeared entirely. When England finally vanished behind clouds, she closed her eyes and tried to imagine the future waiting for her in Australia. Meanwhile, William had returned to his study, attempting to lose himself in the mountain of paperwork that always demanded his attention. But concentration proved impossible. Every few minutes, he found himself checking his phone, calculating the time zones, wondering where Kate was in her journey. Camilla appeared in his doorway just after lunch, her expression carefully neutral. She had barely spoken to Kate during her final week at the palace, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor that made her disapproval clear, without creating an obvious scene. "How are you managing?" Camilla asked, settling into the chair across from William's desk. "I'm fine," William replied automatically, then stopped himself. "No, that's not true. I'm not fine. I'm worried and sad and proud and terrified, all at the same time." Camilla nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Those are natural feelings. Change is never easy, especially when it involves separation from someone you love. I keep wondering if we're making a terrible mistake," William admitted. "If I should have insisted she stay, or if I should have found a way to go with her. But you didn't do either of those things because you knew they wouldn't work," Camilla pointed out gently. "Sometimes there are no perfect solutions. William, sometimes you have to choose between different kinds of sacrifice." It was the closest Camilla had come to accepting Kate's decision, and William found some comfort in her words, even though he could sense her continued reservations. "I suppose we'll find out if we made the right choice," William said. "Yes," Camilla agreed. "You will." The conversation that followed was more honest than any they had shared since Kate's announcement. Camilla admitted her fear that Kate's absence would reflect poorly on the royal family, while William expressed his belief that supporting his wife's ambitions might actually strengthen their public image in the long term. They didn't reach agreement, but they found understanding. As afternoon faded into evening, William's phone finally buzzed with a message from Kate. She had landed in Singapore for her connecting flight and wanted him to know she was thinking of him. The message was brief and factual, but William read it 3 times, searching for signs of regret or uncertainty, and finding none. He typed back a similarly brief response, telling her he loved her and hoped her flight was comfortable. But after sending it, he sat, staring at his phone, struck by how inadequate words seemed for conveying everything he felt. The next 24 hours passed slowly for both of them. Kate's plane crossed time zones and continents while William went through the motions of his daily routine, attending meetings and fulfilling obligations while part of his attention remained focused on the sky, following his wife's journey across the world. When Kate finally landed in Sydney, it was morning in Australia but the middle of the night in London. William was asleep when her call came through, but he answered immediately, desperate to hear her voice. "I made it," Kate said, her voice tired but strong. "It's beautiful here, William. The harbor is incredible. Are you okay? How do you feel?" There was a pause, and William could hear sounds in the background. Voices, movement, the noise of an airport. "Scared," Kate admitted. "Excited, overwhelmed. Like I've just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure yet if I'm flying or falling." "You're flying," William said with more confidence than he felt. "You're absolutely flying." They talked for 10 more minutes before Kate had to go meet her welcoming committee. After hanging up, William lay awake in their empty bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to adjust to this new reality. The weeks that followed established a routine of sorts. Kate threw herself into her new role with characteristic determination, learning about Australian culture, meeting with government officials, and beginning to develop the framework for her exchange program. Her days were full and challenging, exactly what she had hoped for professionally, but the evenings were harder. Despite the beauty of her Sydney apartment and the kindness of her new colleagues, Kate found herself profoundly lonely as the sun set each day. The time difference meant that William was often asleep when she was finishing work, and when he was awake, he was usually in meetings or fulfilling his own obligations. Their scheduled video calls became precious lifelines, moments when they could see each other's faces and share the details of their separate days. But the conversations also highlighted the growing distance between their experiences. Kate's world was expanding with new relationships and challenges, while William's remained anchored to familiar routines and responsibilities. 3 weeks into her assignment, Kate had her first real crisis. A cultural misunderstanding had led to tension between the British and Australian teams working on the exchange program, and Kate found herself in the middle of a diplomatic incident that threatened to undermine everything she was trying to accomplish. She handled the situation professionally, organizing meetings and facilitating conversations that eventually resolved the conflict. But the stress of navigating such challenges alone, without William's support and counsel, left her feeling more isolated than ever. That night, she called William at an unusual time, catching him just as he was preparing for bed. "I need to hear your voice," she said without preamble. "I need you to tell me I'm doing the right thing." William could hear the exhaustion and uncertainty in her voice, and his heart ached with the desire to comfort her in person. "Tell me what happened," he said, settling into his chair and giving her his full attention. Kate described the crisis and her response, her voice gaining strength as she talked through the events. William listened carefully, asking questions and offering insights that helped her process the experience. "You handled it perfectly," he said when she finished. "Better than I would have, probably. You have a gift for understanding different perspectives and finding common ground." "Do you really think so? Because today I felt like I was drowning. Today you felt like you were learning," William corrected gently. "There's a difference. And tomorrow you'll be stronger because of what you learned today." After they hung up, both Kate and William felt the bittersweet comfort of their connection alongside the sharp pain of their separation. They were managing to support each other across the distance, but the effort required was enormous and the toll was becoming apparent. Back in London, William was facing his own challenges. Without Kate's steady presence and social skills, official functions felt more burdensome. He found himself making excuses to avoid events that had been bearable when Kate was by his side. The media had begun to speculate about the state of their marriage, analyzing every public appearance for signs of strain or unhappiness. William's staff worked hard to manage the narrative, but the constant scrutiny added pressure to an already difficult situation. Camilla, who had watched William struggle through the first month of Kate's absence, finally acknowledged what she was seeing. "You miss her terribly," she observed during one of their weekly lunches. "Every day," William admitted. "But that doesn't mean we made the wrong choice. It just means the choice has costs." "High costs," Camilla noted. "Yes. But so would the alternative have had costs. At least this way, we're both becoming who we're meant to be, even if it's harder than we expected." Camilla nodded slowly. And William realized she was beginning to understand something she hadn't before. The sacrifice Kate was making was different from the ones Camilla had made, but it was still a sacrifice. And the strength it took for William to support that sacrifice was its own form of service to their marriage. As Kate's first month in Australia came to an end, she and William were both changed by the experience. The easy intimacy of their daily life together had been replaced by something more intentional and precious. Their conversations were deeper, their time together more valued, their appreciation for each other more conscious. But they were also more aware of how fragile their connection could be across such distances. The challenges Kate faced professionally were made harder by William's absence, while his royal duties felt more isolating without her partnership. Neither of them knew yet whether they would emerge from this experience stronger or whether the strain would ultimately prove too much. They only knew that they were committed to finding out, day by day, conversation by conversation, crisis by crisis. The future remained uncertain, filled with opportunities for both triumph and heartbreak. But they faced it together, even from opposite sides of the world, bound by a love that was being tested in ways they had never imagined but which remained unbroken despite the distance between them. Kate's tearful goodbye had marked not just a departure but a transformation, changing them both in ways they were only beginning to understand. Whether that change would ultimately strengthen or strain their marriage remained to be seen. But they faced that uncertainty with courage, commitment, and an enduring faith in their love for each other.